Do you struggle with sloppy cuts in your leather projects? Here's our tips and tricks to achieve perfect cuts every time. Welcome back to our Leather Fundamentals series, where we tell you everything you need to know to start your leather crafting journey, and we are going to build out a couple projects along the way for you to watch. I'm Corbin, the leather content specialist here at Sailrite, and this is the second video in our series. If you happen to miss the first episode, where we talked about selecting and dyeing leather, you can catch up on that video right here. But today we're going to tackle the skill that gave me the most trouble when I was getting started. That's measuring and cutting. Unless you have a fancy laser at home to get perfect cuts, every single leather project requires accurate measurements and precise cuts. My first few months of leather crafting were full of frustration because I kept ruining projects because of my dull knife against my slippery ruler on a wooden cutting board. So hopefully today you can learn to avoid some of those mistakes that I made and learn some useful bits of information about my cutting process and the measuring and cutting tools that Sailrite has to offer. All right, we've got all our tools laid out here, and I know what you might be thinking, this looks like a lot, but if you ask me, it's worth a few extra bucks to find the right measurement tools and knives to best suit your projects. So you can find the ones that suit your work best, whether it's 2 of these, 3 of these, and a couple of rulers to get you a good starting point. And then as you do different type of projects down the line, maybe you want to upgrade to a new ruler or a different type of knife. And so let's go down the list here of everything that we've got so you know their names and kind of what they do. Strap cutter, scratch awl for marking lines on our blades. We've got the flathead, mini round, French angled, 2 straight edge knife, this one with a Damascus blade, and another Damascus blade knife. This one is the Japanese skiving knife. Up here we've got our rotary cutter, scissors. This is a leather strop and some stropping compound for sharpening and polishing our blades. Up here with the rulers, we've got one of our acrylic rulers and 3 of our metal straight edge rulers. And every cut you see me make today is going to be on our self-healing cutting mat. And these are great because it protects the blade of your knife so you don't have to sharpen quite as often, and it obviously protects your work surface as well. So very important to cut on one of those for the sake of your blades and your work surface. For straight passes, my go-to blades are the French tip knife and the rotary cutter. And the French tip knife offers a little bit more precision and control for shorter cuts, and a sharp rotary cutter is perfect for those long straight passes. And any straight edge can be used. A metal ruler is the best place to start. But acrylic rulers, they can just be a little less forgiving, and if your angle is off, using something like this sort of knife, you can kind of cut into the ruler. Obviously, you don't want to damage our rulers. So if you're using an acrylic, I'd probably recommend to start off with a rotary cutter, but as you get more practice, you can use these with acrylic ruler. Just be careful. And the most important tip I can give when it comes to rulers is to find a way to make them anti-slip, because I've ruined so many projects by having a ruler slip out from under me at a bad time. So you might have experienced something like this. You're cutting down and then it's going great, and then your ruler slips. And even if it's 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, that ruins your whole cut. You got to restart, could potentially ruin a project. So a quick and easy solution I've found to this is just to take some leather cement and some masking tape that you have laying around. And I just tape up the back of the ruler and apply some leather cement and get a nice texture so that it's got something to grip onto. And now we've got the sticky side here, and with any sort of pressure, it's not going anywhere. Whereas on the smooth back of a ruler, with just a little bit of pressure, and it'll slide around on you. And so we don't want that, it can ruin a project. So whether it's this method or any other method you find that works for you, find a way to make your rulers anti-slip. So now let's move on to cutting curved lines. My favorite tools for cutting curves is gonna be the mini round knife. And in some instances, I like to use scissors as well. And the reason I like this for curves is obviously the blade is curved. And it's small, so you can get in tight curves, and it's just very ergonomic to hold. So let's go ahead and test that out. I'm gonna do a quick line with our scratch awl to give myself something to follow. All right, and that's a pretty smooth curve right there. And if you have to, you can sand anything off to get a nice smooth surface. And one more point while I have this mini round knife, this knife can be used for pull cutting like you just saw me do, or for push cutting. With everything except for my rotary cutter, I always pull towards me just because I feel like I have a little bit more control. But I'll give a try to do a push cut if you think that might be best for you. Nice curve. So there you go. You can also use leather scissors like these that we have here. And for a lot of people, it's just more comfortable and feels more natural to cut with the scissor motion rather than something like a fixed blade. So if it works better for you and feels more comfortable, that's a great option for curved cuts as well. When it comes to cutting panels, I like to use acrylic rulers. They're unbeatable when it comes to making square and rectangle panels. It ensures precise 90-degree cuts and offers visibility through the clear material. This is especially handy for avoiding blemishes or showcasing unique leather sections. These rulers also provide surface pressure on the whole piece, ensuring your piece lies flat while you're cutting. This is essential for leather with a softer temper, which if you remember from our last video, a soft temper means it's more supple and less rigid. And that kind of leather can be prone to warping as you cut it. So a nice even surface pressure is really important to get the best cuts with a soft, supple leather. For projects that require straps, we turn to the aptly named strap cutter. Two important things to remember when using this tool is to set it up based on the thickness of your leather, and also it works better on firm tempered leather. So now I'll walk you through how I set up my strap cutter to get the best cuts every time. The last thing I cut was, I think, a 2 to 3 ounce leather, so right now it's set up for that. Let's cut a piece of this 7 to 8 ounce and I'll walk you through how I'm gonna adjust it. So I'm gonna start off by adjusting the thickness. Our leather passes through here to make the cut. This leather's too thick to pass through right now. So there's two things we got to look at here. It's these screws and this adjustment knob there. So I'll go ahead and loosen these up. Don't have to take them all out, just a quarter turn or so. And so this allows me to move those. So I'll move that. That looks about right. And I'll loosen this back piece up here. And we want this piece of wood and this piece of wood to be vertical. We don't want this side to be wider than that side or vice versa. So we want to be a nice tight fit without actually scratching the leather. So now I've got that tightened. Another thing to be mindful of when you're setting up your strap cutter is this screw right here. You can loosen that up and this is what determines the thickness of your strap. And so this is the flat plane here that you're looking at. So that measurement there would be 1 inch, 2 inches, and this goes all the way up to 4 inches. For the sake of our demonstration, I'm gonna do 1 inch. And another tip is there's some room in here. And so you want to put that flush with the top so that we don't cut at an angle. So put that flush at the top, get our 1 inch measurement, and then tighten down that screw. And now we're ready to cut. So roll out our leather here. We've already got a nice straight edge to cut against. If you've got a brand new piece of leather, you've got to use a straight edge at least one time to get yourself a straight line to base off of. But this is already done. So now we're gonna get started. You just put the flat edge of the leather against the flat edge of the strap cutter right there. And while I'm cutting, this is actually what I'm looking at the whole time. If at any point I can see daylight right here, that means I'm not cutting straight. Or if this drifts this way and I see daylight that way, that means something's gone awry. So that straight edge needs to be on the straight edge through the entire cut. And that's kind of how you check yourself to make sure you're cutting straight. So just nice pull. There you go. Super easy. You got a perfect strap. And if you've got to do a few straps, you can get an exactly perfect match if you're doing multiple straps for a bag or a purse and anything like that. Nifty little tool. To freehand rounded corners, I like to use the flathead knife to make a series of smaller cuts until we have a nice rounded corner. And after that, we can smooth things out with our sanding stick if there's any subtle imperfections. It's important to maintain your knives to ensure that they cut properly. A good habit to form is to strop and hone your blade before you start cutting. And you don't have to do this every time before each individual cut. Just do it once after you grab it off the shelf and begin working. And if your knife is badly dulled, you may need to use multiple stropping compounds and work down from coarse to extra fine grits. To reprofile and fix a damaged blade, you might need to use a whetstone or diamond plates or another blade sharpening system. Some leather workers prefer to use knives with replaceable blades and simply pop in a new blade when the old one gets dull. This does mean you have to keep buying blades over the years, but if you aren't comfortable with sharpening, this is a good alternative. And now that we know what all of our options are for cutting and measuring tools, let's get to work. Editor, don't use those clips. So we'll work on our wallet first. This is the piece of leather we dyed in our first fundamentals video. If you haven't got a chance to check that out, like I said earlier, go give it a watch so you know how we got this cool effect. And the pattern that you see here is also going to be a free download that you can get in the description. It'll be a PDF download. You can use your printer at home and follow along with us. And the way that I like to cut out my patterns, especially small patterns, is to use, I guess, what I would call the tape method. And that's just you use clear packaging tape, or masking tape works as well, to tape your pattern down onto your leather. And that way you can cut out your lines through the tape and it keeps everything in place without letting your pattern shift around. So let's get started with that. So I'm just covering the whole paper pattern and attaching it to the leather with this tape. And like I mentioned, that'll just make sure that the pattern doesn't shift on us and it keeps everything in place. It makes it really easy to perfectly cut out our patterns. All right, so the knives that I'm gonna use to cut out these shapes are going to be the mini round knife for this curve section here and here, and then the French angle knife for most of our straight cuts. And I'll show you how to use a rotary cutter too on the straight cuts. And everything can be cut just with the normal 12-inch metal ruler. And I'm actually gonna use a rotary cutter to cut off this excess leather to make these pieces easier to work with. So now with those cut out, I'll use my 12-inch ruler and the French angled knife to make some straight passes. So I'm gonna set my ruler right here against my line. We're gonna be aiming right for the center of that line. And then with the tip of our blade, lay it down and with nice even pressure, pull that towards you. Sometimes it takes 2 passes depending on how sharp your knife is and how thick the leather is. A lot of times it takes 1 pass, but sometimes it takes more. Now that I've done a few cuts with the French angle knife, I'll show a few on the rotary cutter. So I'm gonna line the ruler up to the line, and I'm shooting pretty much for the dead center point of that line, putting good pressure on the ruler to make sure it doesn't slide anywhere and ruin the cut. Just cut straight through. Doing all the straight passes now, and I'll leave the more difficult curved passes for last. And you'll notice I'm not worrying about these rounded edges just yet. In the next video, when we talk about gluing and sewing our leather, I'm gonna glue the pieces and then I'll cut those rounded corners at that time once they're all together. And that'll be using this flathead knife right here. First shape, here's those inside pockets. Now we'll get to the fun part of cutting the curved lines. I'm gonna use the mini round knife. And before I actually cut anything, I'm gonna go ahead and, just to be safe, add another piece of tape, because I want all 4 sides of my cut to be held down by tape. So I'm gonna separate those from each other, cut the paper back a little bit. Now, 1 more piece of tape for safety, just so that that paper pattern is firmly in place as we make this rounded cut. So now we'll use the mini round knife and we'll make these curved cuts. Like I mentioned earlier, I prefer to do a pull cut. I feel like I have a little bit more control. Just nice and steady around the curved part. Okay. 1 down. And 2 down. So now we'll clean up those last few edges with the rotary cutter. There's 1. There's 2. And our last cut will be this big swooping curve. Make sure our tape is well stuck so it doesn't shift on us. And the key to this is just to be really smooth, try to have a consistent speed, and just cut right through the middle of that guideline. And there we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now that we've got all of our pieces cut out, we can set these aside and continue working on it on the next video. So now we're gonna work on the tote bag, and this is some larger panels, so we're gonna be using some different tools here. For our measuring tools, I'm gonna use the 36-inch ruler, and I've got my tape set up back here so it doesn't slip on us. And we'll also use one of our acrylic rulers as well, so we get nice 90-degree corners. And for our cutting tools, I'm gonna use the rotary cutter for those long passes, the flathead knife for our straps to trim off the excess length once we get there, and then to cut those straps, the strap cutter. And if you want to follow along with me and make this bag for yourself, we do have detailed dimensions for the different panels in the description, as well as a PDF pattern for you. And I've already done the work to transfer the pattern onto this piece of cardstock paper, just so that I can use it as a template for the future. So you can do that for yourself, or you can just take those dimensions we give you and cut out the panels that way. So So now I found a good spot to cut my panel out of to save leather and not have much waste. So I'll cut the main body here, and out of this section right there, that should be wide enough to get my straps out of that. And then I'll cut that other panel for the front pocket right in this area here. So I'll start off with my long ruler, and we'll make the first of these longer cuts. I'm gonna use my scratch awl. Where is my scratch awl? So I'll leave my template here for the time being, just so that I can make sure I make it the right length. So now I'm gonna mark all the lines with my scratch awl, so I know where to cut. Now I've gone ahead and marked our pattern all the way around so I can move the template, and we'll get started cutting our lines. So let's make this first cut with our rotary cutter. And a tip when I make long cuts is I like to keep my hand putting that downward pressure right by my blade the whole time. Because if I leave it here and then I go, there's a good chance I'm gonna push that ruler over. And so apply consistent pressure and kind of have that hand creep along with your rotary cutter or knife, whatever you're using, to apply even pressure right by that blade. All right, so now I'm gonna shift the piece so we can make those other two long cuts. So I'm just gonna slide this over to the edge of the table just because I want a good comfortable angle while I'm cutting. I like to be kind of over my cut, so this way I'm able to have more control. Now we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. And there we go. We got our body panel all cut out. Now I'm gonna cut off this piece right here. That'll be used for our straps here in a moment. Save that for later. Now we'll clear out our workspace, and then I'll cut out these openings right here. I'm actually gonna bring out my French angled knife again, because it's kind of it's a short cut, but it's straight. So like I said earlier, this is best for short, precise cuts. Now as I'm cutting this line, I'm not gonna go all the way up to this point or that point, because I don't want to overcut. I'll clean that up with my flathead knife here in just a second. Now we'll quickly do the same thing on the other side. All right, now we're gonna get our straps cut. We're gonna do 4 1-inch straps because we're gonna glue them together and sew them. And I've already got my strap cutter dialed in here to not have too much play right there. So let's get cutting. All right, last cut. And another quick tip that I like to do is I'm holding with my thumb and my pointer finger, and I'm keeping this leather even where it's gonna be cut, so it's not way down here or way up there. I'm holding it right there and guiding it along nicely to the blade. Now I'm going to trim the ends of these straps with the flathead knife to get them all to 30 inches. Now we've got 4 identical 30-inch straps ready to be glued and sewn together for our bag. And for our last piece of this pattern, it's going to be the front pocket. So I've got a nice straight edge here from where I cut out the body. So this is a good place for the pocket. I'm gonna cut this away roughly just so it's easier to work with. And like I mentioned earlier, I really like to use the acrylic rulers to cut out panels like this rectangle. So I'll grab one of those. And so I'll use this ruler here. This is going to be 11 by 7.5 inches. I'll actually set this aside. I can do it with just the ruler. So I've got 7.5 inches here. I'll make this cut and this one, and I'll have a perfect 90-degree angle right there that I can base my second cut off of. And so now I've got a perfect 90-degree here, so I'm gonna shift my piece. So I'll use that angle to base this next cut off of. That's 7.5 by 11. So I'll make that last cut right there, and we'll be all done. And there we go, we've got our last shape cut out. And you saw I didn't even have to use my template that time because the grid lines on these acrylic rulers are just perfect for cutting out those panels. But I will have to use this template to get some rounded radii. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I don't know which word to say. And I'll mark out my line here on the corner with my scratch awl. I'll use a flathead knife and just take short little cuts until we have a nice rounded edge. Give it a quick sand, make sure everything is nice and smooth. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. With our shapes cut out, we can go ahead and move to the next step of the process. So follow along with us for Fundamentals 3, where we talk about gluing and sewing. And if you're looking to upgrade your cutting game or measuring game, you can see all the tools I use in the description below. In the description will also be the PDF patterns for both the wallet and the tote bag projects if you want to download that and work alongside me. So with that being said, that's all we got for the video today. And if you feel like you learned something, go ahead and hit that like or subscribe button. It helps us out a lot. All right, so I'll see you in the next one.